Fake wealth is killing people who think they are winning. Right now, someone is driving a car they cannot afford, wearing a watch that costs 3 months of savings, and posting pictures from a vacation they financed on a credit card. And they call it success. Solomon called it something else. He called it a trap. And in the ancient texts of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, he left behind a precise diagnostic, a surgical map that exposes when the wealth someone displays is not wealth at all, it is performance. This video is that map, and at the very end, there is a prayer waiting for you, a prayer for discernment, clarity, and real provision. Stay until the end, it matters. Let us begin with the wound before we name the disease. There is a syndrome so old it predates social media, predates Instagram, predates every influencer who ever pointed a camera at a rented penthouse. Scholars have called it different things across different centuries. Solomon had a name for it too, though not in polite language. He was watching the people of his kingdom, the wealthiest civilization of the ancient world, and he noticed something that disturbed him. The ones shouting about their prosperity were often the most fragile. The ones who were truly stable made no noise at all. The appearance of wealth, he understood, was not just a vanity, it was a symptom. It meant something was broken underneath. The fake noble syndrome, the compulsion to look rich rather than be rich, is not a modern invention. It is an ancient disease with new packaging. And Solomon, who held more gold than most nations, understood exactly what it was. The confession of a person who does not trust what they actually have. Here is the first incision. Proverbs chapter 13, verse 7. Read it slowly. One person pretends to be rich, yet has nothing. Another pretends to be poor, yet has great wealth. That is not a riddle. That is a clinical observation from the wisest man who ever managed a national economy. Solomon is not describing two different people he admired. He is describing two different strategies. One that leads to ruin, and one that builds something that outlasts a generation. The person pretending to be rich is not just lying to others. They are lying to the ledger. Every purchase made for appearance is a vote against the future. Every borrowed dollar spent on status is compound interest working in reverse. And here is what most people miss. Solomon is not condemning wealth. He built the most magnificent temple the ancient world had ever seen. He is condemning the theater of wealth, the performance that substitutes for the reality. Stop for a moment. Ask yourself honestly, how much of what you own is for your actual life? And how much is for someone else's opinion of your life? That question is not comfortable. It is not supposed to be. The genuinely prosperous people in history, the ones whose resources compounded across generations, were almost never the loudest people in the room. They dressed ordinarily. They drove ordinary vehicles. They ate at ordinary tables. Their power was invisible because their foundation was mathematical, not theatrical. The man in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 7, who pretends to be poor, yet holds great wealth, is not ashamed. He is strategic. He has learned what Solomon spent a lifetime teaching, that the loudest signal of real security is silence. That is the first pattern. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it in the people around you. But Solomon did not stop at appearances. He went somewhere more uncomfortable. Proverbs chapter 12, verse 9. Better to be a nobody and yet have a servant than to pretend to be somebody and have no food. He is describing someone who has mastered the projection of status while their pantry is literally empty. This is the entitlement trap. The psychology of demanding a lifestyle before the cash flow to support it has ever been built. And it is epidemic right now. The middle class is full of people who believe a certain kind of life is simply owed to them. The car, the apartment, the wardrobe, before the income to sustain any of it actually exists. They consume the harvest before the seed has been planted. Solomon, who understood agriculture, trade, and the slow compounding of real resources, recognized this pattern for what it was. Self-destruction wearing an expensive coat. From there, the trap deepens. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 7. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. The slavery of luxury is not metaphorical. It is a legal and economic reality. When you take on debt to maintain an image, you are not borrowing money. You are borrowing time, future work, mornings you have not lived yet, spent before they arrive. The lender does not need chains because the monthly payment is already a chain. Solomon watched this happen in his own kingdom. Men of genuine talent handing their futures to creditors in exchange for the comfort of today. And he wrote it down so that thousands of years later, we would not have to learn it the hard way. This is where the diagnosis becomes undeniable. These are not just bad financial habits. This is a spiritual misalignment. A man in debt to appearances has placed his identity in the hands of objects. His self-worth is financed. And a financed identity is the most precarious structure a human being can build their life upon. Here is your moment to anchor this truth. Leave a comment right now and tell us where in the world you are watching from. From Brazil, from Nigeria, from the United States, from the Philippines, wherever you are. Solomon's warning reaches you because human nature does not change with geography. Drop your city or your country below. Let us see how far this wisdom travels. Charlie Munger, the investor and philosopher who spent a lifetime studying the architecture of great decisions, once said something that sounds modern, but reads like Solomon translated into business English. He called it the principle of inversion. Invert. Always invert. Instead of asking how to become wealthy, ask what guarantees poverty. Instead of chasing the outcome, identify the behaviors that destroy it, and then systematically eliminate them. Remove the causes of failure, and success often follows without force. Solomon had been practicing inversion for 3,000 years before Munger named it. Look at the historical record. Solomon managed a kingdom with a gross domestic product that historians estimate exceeded $300 billion modern dollars. He controlled trade routes across the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. He formed alliances through commerce, not just conquest. He ran a copper mining operation in Timnah that was the largest of its age. And here is what is fascinating. Not one ancient account describes Solomon as conspicuous in his personal consumption the way his court was magnificent. The court was magnificent for political theater, to project national power to visiting dignitaries, to visiting queens like Sheba, who came to test his wisdom. But Solomon himself was famous for wisdom, not for what he wore. The temple was for God. The wealth was a stewardship. Now here is where inversion meets scripture. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 verse 11 cuts like a scalpel. As goods increase, so do those who consume them. And what benefit are they to the owner, except to feast his eyes on them? As income rises, spending rises faster. As the account grows, the appetites grow faster still. And at the end of it, Solomon asked the most painful question a wealthy man can ask himself. What do I actually have? Not what have I spent, not what have I shown, but what do I possess after the consumption is subtracted? Most people cannot answer that because they have never stopped long enough to ask it. They have been too busy upgrading. Picture it concretely. A man earns more this year than he did last year. He moves to a better apartment. He trades his car. He eats at restaurants that would have been unthinkable 2 years ago. And at the end of the year, despite earning significantly more, he has saved less than he did when he was poor. The income statement grew. The balance sheet did not move. This is not a math problem. It is a values problem. It is the slow, invisible transfer of future security into present pleasure. One upgraded decision at a time. Solomon called the person who resists this drain a wise builder. And a wise builder knows one thing before anything else. The foundation must be fully funded before you choose the decoration. If this wisdom is striking something true inside you right now, press the like button. It costs nothing, and it tells the world that real wisdom still has an audience. Here is what almost no one wants to hear, because it sounds so simple that people walk right past it. Proverbs chapter 21:20. The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down. Capital preservation versus impulsive consumption. Solomon is not praising misers. He is describing discipline in the present as the price of real options in the future. The wise person stores. The fool consumes everything immediately. And the gap between those two behaviors, when you compound it across a decade, is the difference between freedom and permanent financial anxiety. The impulsive spender is not necessarily a bad person. They are simply present biased, meaning the reward right in front of them always feels larger than the abstract reward waiting somewhere in the future. This is not a moral failure. It is human biology. But wisdom is the override of biology. It is what a person chooses to see when they train themselves to look further than today. An income arrives. One person sees permission to spend, the other sees raw material. The outcome of those two interpretations, compounded over years, diverges so dramatically that they end up in completely different economic realities. Not because of luck, not because of opportunity, but because of a single recurring choice made quietly every month. Now listen carefully. John Wesley, the theologian and founder of the Methodist movement, spent decades watching what money did to human souls. He arrived at a principle so stripped down, it still functions as a complete financial philosophy. Gain all you can, save all you can, give all you can. But Wesley was precise about the sequence. Gaining without saving is consumption with extra steps. Saving without giving becomes hoarding dressed up as discipline. And giving without first gaining is just noble poverty that runs out before it helps anyone. The three move together, or none of them fully function. Wesley saw frugality not as deprivation, but as redirection. Every dollar not spent on vanity is a dollar available for someone who genuinely needs bread. He called extravagant personal spending a form of theft from the poor. Not in the legal sense, in the moral sense. And that moral weight brings us to perhaps the most seductive trap Solomon identified. Proverbs chapter 28:22. The stingy are eager to get rich and are unaware that poverty awaits them. This is not about being tight with giving. It is about the fevered, impatient chase after quick gain. The person who is certain they have found a shortcut that everyone else was too slow to see. Poverty, Solomon says, is already waiting at the end of that road. Patient, invisible, inevitable. Proverbs chapter 13:11 confirms it from a different angle. Wealth obtained through vanity diminishes, but what is gathered through honest labor multiplies. The accumulation of real resources is almost always slow, boring, and completely invisible to the watching world. And that is precisely why most people abandon it before it matures. Now we arrive at the trap that has silently destroyed more ordinary families than almost any other mechanism in financial history. Proverbs chapter 6:1-2. My son, if you have put up security for your neighbor, if you have shaken hands in pledge for a stranger, you have been trapped by what you said, ensnared by the words of your mouth, the cosigner, the guarantor, the person who becomes legally responsible for someone else's debt because they wanted to appear generous or loyal or powerful enough to absorb the risk. Solomon does not say this person is wicked in their motive. He says they are trapped by the consequence. And a trap does not care about your intentions. It only cares about your ankle. The guarantor walks in believing they are helping. They are demonstrating trust in a friend, faith in a family member. But what is actually happening is the conversion of a relationship into a liability. When the borrower defaults, and Proverbs is not optimistic about this outcome, the guarantor inherits the debt, their provision, their future, consumed by someone else's inability or unwillingness to pay. Step back and look at the full picture that emerges from everything Solomon observed. There are two kinds of people navigating the same economic world. The first type earns and immediately redirects that income toward appearances. Borrowed cars, financed wardrobes, guaranteed loans for people who ask. Their identity is loud and financially hollow. Every month is a race between what comes in and what goes out, and the outflow tends to win. The second type earns and allocates deliberately. They store instead of gulp. They avoid guarantees that could drain what took years to build. Their life looks unimpressive from the outside, but their balance sheet grows quietly in the background, compounding in the dark, asking no one for applause. Solomon's principle of stewardship is not complicated, but it requires something that modern culture actively discourages: deferred gratification, the capacity to say no to a beautiful present in exchange for a structurally sound future. Solomon built the temple over 7 years, 7 years of planning, funding, sourcing, and construction before a single dedication ceremony. He did not rush the foundation to impress anyone watching. He built for eternity. The wisdom of Proverbs does not ask you to be poor. It asks you to be honest about the difference between possession and performance, between depth and display, between an identity that is borrowed and a stability that is earned. Biblical wisdom does not promise ease. It promises orientation. And a person who is oriented correctly can navigate any economic season without losing their footing. Paul wrote in his first letter to Timothy, chapter 6:6, "But godliness with contentment is great gain, not contentment as resignation, contentment as a calibrated relationship with enough." Knowing what enough actually looks like, and refusing to let someone else's appetite redefine yours every time a new product launches. Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher and Christian thinker, spent years dissecting what he called the leveling process, the way modern society flattens individual thought under the slow, relentless pressure of collective opinion. When everyone around you is performing wealth, the cost of not performing feels genuinely unbearable. The crowd becomes the standard, and the crowd, Kierkegaard observed, acts almost exclusively from anxiety rather than from principle. Social status is the crowd's currency, and like all currencies that are not backed by anything real, it inflates and eventually collapses into nothing. Solomon saw the exact same mechanism operating in the ancient marketplace of Jerusalem. Men and women making financial decisions based not on their actual resources, but on how they needed to be perceived by neighbors who were themselves performing for someone else. A hall of mirrors, everyone dressed for an audience that is also dressed for an audience. And behind every mirror, the actual ledger is empty. Real wealth does not post, it does not perform, it does not need your agreement or your admiration. It simply compounds year after year in records no one else ever sees through decisions that never make a sound. The good abandonment that Solomon ultimately calls us toward is not the abandonment of ambition. It is not a retreat from the world. It is the release of the need to be seen as wealthy in exchange for the patient, unglamorous, mathematical work of actually becoming free. That freedom is not loud, it does not photograph well, but it is the only kind that survives a crisis, raises children with real foundations, and produces peace when the performance finally gets too exhausting to maintain. If this channel is giving you tools to think differently about provision, stewardship, and wisdom, subscribe now. Press the button. Join this community of people who are choosing depth over display. And now, close your eyes if you can, or align your thoughts with mine right now. Set aside whatever noise surrounds you. Let this moment be still. Let us pray. Father, you see every ledger. You see the real numbers, not the performed ones. You see where we have borrowed to appear. You see where we have spent to impress. And you see the quiet places in us that are tired of the performance. We ask today for the wisdom that Solomon asked for. Not for wealth itself, but for the discernment to build it correctly. Give us the discipline to preserve what you provide. Give us the clarity to recognize the traps before we step into them. Give us the courage to choose the invisible path when every voice around us celebrates the visible one. Let our stewardship honor you. Let our resources serve others. Let our lives be evidence that real provision does not shout. It endures. Amen. Go in peace, build in wisdom, and remember, the wealth that lasts is always the wealth that was never performed. If this journey through Solomon's ancient wisdom has challenged the way you view success and security, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. We are dedicated to uncovering the historical and spiritual truths that have been buried by modern noise. Let us plant the seeds of a stable future together. The next treasury of wisdom will be opened for you very soon.